Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garrett. He rose to his feet, looked round in wonder as though surprised at finding himself in this place, and went towards the bridge. He was pale, his eyes glowed. He was exhausted in every limb, but he seemed suddenly to breathe more easily. He felt he had cast off that fearful burden that had so long been weighing upon him, and all at once there was a sense of relief and peace in his soul. "Lord," he prayed, "show me my path. I renounce that accursed dream of mine." Crossing the bridge, he gazed quietly and calmly at the Neva, at the glowing red sun setting in the glowing sky. In spite of his weakness, he was not conscious of fatigue. It was as though an abscess that had been forming for a month past in his heart had suddenly broken. Freedom! Freedom! He was free from that spell, that sorcery, that obsession. Later on, when he recalled that time and all that happened to him during those days, minute by minute, point by point, he was superstitiously impressed by one circumstance, which, though in itself not very exceptional, always seemed to him afterwards that predestined turning point of his fate. He could never understand and explain to himself why, when he was tired and worn out, when it would have been more convenient for him to go home by the shortest and most direct way, he had returned by the Haymarket, where he had no need to go. It was obviously and quite unnecessarily out of his way, though not much so. It is true that it happened to him dozens of times to return home without noticing what streets he passed through. But why? He was always asking himself, why had such an important, such a decisive, and at the same time such an absolutely chance meeting happened in the Haymarket, where he had moreover no reason to go, at the very hour, the very minute of his life, when he was just in the very mood and in the very circumstances in which that meeting was able to exert the greatest and most decisive influence of his whole destiny, as though it had been lying in wait for him on purpose. It was about 9 o'clock when he crossed the Haymarket. At the tables and the barrows, at the booths and the shops, all the market people were closing their establishments or clearing away and packing up their wares and, like their customers, were going home. Rag pickers and costermongers of all kinds were crowding around the taverns in the dirty and stinking courtyards of the Haymarket. Raskolnikov particularly liked this place and the neighboring alleys, when he wandered aimlessly in the streets. Here, his rags did not attract contemptuous attention, and one could walk about in any attire without scandalizing people. At the corner of an alley, a huckster and his wife had two tables set out with tapes, thread, cotton, handkerchiefs, etc. They too had got up to the go home, but were lingering in conversation with a friend who had just come up to them. This friend was Lizaveta Ivanova, or as everyone called her, Lizaveta, the younger sister of the old pawnbroker, Anna Ivanova, whom Raskolnikov had visited the previous day to pawn his watch and make his experiment. He already knew all about Lizaveta, and she knew him a little too. She was a single woman of about 35, tall, clumsy, timid, submissive, and almost idiotic. She was a complete slave and went in fear and trembling of her sister, who made her work day and night and even beat her. She was standing with a bundle before the huckster and his wife, listening earnestly and doubtfully. They were talking of something with special warmth. The moment Raskolnikov caught sight of her, he was overcome by a strange sensation, as it were, of intense astonishment, though there was nothing astonishing about this meeting. You could make up your mind for yourself, Lizaveta Ivanovna, the huckster was saying aloud. Come round tomorrow about 7. They will be here too. Tomorrow, said Lizaveta, slowly and thoughtfully, as though unable to make up her mind. Upon my word, what a fright you are in of, Elona Nova, gabbled the huckster's wife, a lively little woman. I look at you. You are like some little babe. And she is not your own sister either. Nothing but a stepsister, and what a hand she keeps over you. But this time don't say a word to Anna Ivanova, her husband interrupted. That's my advice. But come round to us without asking. It will be worth your while. Later on your sister herself may have a notion. Am I to come? About 7 o'clock tomorrow. And they will be here. You will be able to decide for yourself. And we'll have a cup of tea, added his wife. All right, I'll come, said Lizaveta, still pondering, and she began slowly moving away. Raskolnikov had just passed and heard no more. He passed softly, unnoticed, trying not to miss a word. His first amazement was followed by a thrill of horror, like a shiver running down his spine. He had suddenly, quite unexpectedly learned that the next day at 7 o'clock, Lizaveta, the old woman's sister and only companion, would be away from home, and that therefore at 7 o'clock precisely, the old woman would be left alone. He was only a few steps from his lodgings. He went in like a man condemned to death. He thought of nothing and was incapable of thinking, but he felt suddenly in his whole being that he had no more freedom of thought, no will, and that everything was suddenly and irrevocably decided. Certainly, if he had to wait whole years for a suitable opportunity, he could not reckon on a more certain step towards the success of the plan than that which had just presented itself. In any case, it would have been difficult to find out beforehand and with certainty, with greater exactness and less risk, and without dangerous inquiries and investigations, that next day at a certain time an old woman on whose life an attempt was contemplated would be at home and entirely alone. Chapter 6. Later on, Raskolnikov happened to find out why the huckster and his wife had invited Lizaveta. It was a very ordinary matter and there was nothing exceptional about it. A family who had come to the town and had been reduced to poverty were selling their household goods and clothes, all women's things. As the things would have fetched little in the market, they were looking for a dealer. This was Lizaveta's business. She undertook such jobs and was frequently employed, as she was very honest and always fixed a fair price and stuck to it. She spoke as a rule little and, as we have said already, she was very submissive and timid. But Raskolnikov had become superstitious of late. The traces of superstition remained in him long after and were almost ineradicable. And in all this, he was always afterwards disposed to see something strange and mysterious, as it were, the presence of some peculiar influences and coincidences. In the previous winter, a student he knew called Revered, who had left for Kharkov, had chanced in conversation to give him the address of Anna Ivanova, the old pawnbroker, in case he might want to pawn anything. For a long while he did not go to her, for he had lessons and managed to get along somehow. 6 weeks ago he had remembered the address. He had 2 articles that could be pawned, his father's old silver watch and a little gold ring with 3 red stones, a present from his sister at parting. He decided to take the ring. When he found the old woman, he had felt an insurmountable repulsion for her at the first glance, though he knew nothing special about her. He got 2 rubles from her and went into a miserable little tavern on his way home. He asked for tea, sat down and sank deep into thought. A strange idea was pecking at his brain like a chicken in the egg, and very, very much absorbed him. Almost beside himself, at the next table, there was sitting a student whom he did not know and had never seen, and with him a young officer. They had played a game of billiards and began drinking tea. All at once he heard the student mention to the officer the pawnbroker, Alona Ivanova, and give him her address. This of itself seemed strange to Raskolnikov. He had just come from her, and here, at once, he heard her name. Of course it was a chance, but he could not shake off a very extraordinary impression, and here someone seemed to be speaking expressively for him. The student began telling his friend various details about Alona Ivanova. "She is first rate," he said. "You can always get money from her. She is as rich as a Jew. She can give you 5,000 rubles at a time, and she is not above taking a pledge for a ruble. Lots of our fellows have had dealings with her, but she is an awful old harpy." And he began describing how spiteful and uncertain she was, how if you were only a day late with your interest, the pledge was lost, how she gave a quarter of the value of an article and took 5 and even 7% a month on it, and so on. The student chattered on, saying that she had a sister, Lizaveta, whom the wretched little creature was continually beating and kept in complete bondage like a small child, though Lizaveta was at least 6 feet high. "There's a phenomenon for you," cried the student, and he laughed. They began talking about Lizaveta. The student spoke about her with a peculiar relish and was continually laughing, and the officer listened with great interest and asked him to send Lizaveta to do some mending for him. Raskolnikov did not miss a word and learned everything about her. Lizaveta was younger than the old woman and was her half-sister, being the child of a different mother. She was 35. She worked day and night for her sister, and besides doing the cooking and the washing, she did sewing and worked as a charwoman and gave her sister all she earned. She did not dare to accept an order or job of any kind without her sister's permission. The old woman had already made her will, and Lizaveta knew of it, and by this will she would not get a farthing. Nothing but the movables, chairs and so on. All the money was left to a monastery in the province of that prayers might be said for her in perpetuity. Lizaveta was of lower rank than her sister, unmarried and awfully uncouth in appearance, remarkably tall and long feet that looked as if they were bent outwards. She always wore battered goatskin shoes and was clean in her person. What the student expressed most surprise and amusement about was the fact that Lizaveta was continually with child. "But you say she is hideous," observed the officer. "Yes, she is so dark-skinned and looks like a soldier dressed up, but you know, she is not all that hideous. She has such a good-natured face and eyes, striking so, and the proof of it is that lots of people are attracted by her. She is such a soft, gentle creature, ready to put up with anything, always willing to do anything, and her smile is really sweet." "You seem to find her attractive yourself," laughed the officer. From her queerness? No, I'll tell you what. I could kill that damned old woman and make off with her money. I assure you, without the faintest conscious prick. The student added with warmth. The officer laughed again, while Raskolnikov shuddered. How strange it was. Listen, I want to ask you a serious question, the student said hotly. I was joking, of course. But look here. On one side, we have a stupid, senseless, worthless, spiteful, ailing, horrid old woman. Not simply useless, but doing actual mischief, who has not an idea what she is living for herself, and who will die in a day or two in any case. You understand? You understand? Yes, I understand, answered the officer, watching his excited companion attentively. Well, listen then. On the other side, fresh young lives thrown away for want of help, and by thousands on every side. 100,000 good deeds could be done and helped on that old woman's money, which will be buried in a monastery. Hundreds and thousands, perhaps, might be set on the right path. Dozens of families saved from destitution, from ruin, from vice, from the lock hospitals, and all with her money. Kill her, take her money, and with the help of it, devote oneself to the service of humanity and the good of all. What do you think? Would not one tiny crime be wiped out by thousands of good deeds? For one life, thousands would be saved from corruption and decay. One death and 100 lives in exchange. It's simple arithmetic. Besides, what value has the life of that sickly, stupid, ill-natured old woman in the balance of existence? No more than the life of a mouse, of a black beetle. Less, in fact, because the old woman is doing harm. She is wearing out the lives of others. The other day she bit Lizavieta's finger out of spite. It almost had to be amputated. Of course she does not deserve to live, remarked the officer. But there it is. It's nature. Oh, well, brother, but we have to correct and direct nature. And but for what? We should drown in an ocean of prejudice. But for that, there would never have been a single great man. They talk of duty, conscience. I don't want to say anything against duty and conscience. But the point is, what do we mean by them? Stay, I have another question for you. Listen. No, you stay. I'll ask you a question. Listen. Well, you are talking and speechifying away. But tell me, would you kill the old woman yourself? Of course not. I was only arguing the justice of it. It's nothing to do with me. But I think if you would not do it yourself, there's no justice about it. Let us have another game. Raskolnikov was violently agitated. Of course, it was all ordinary youthful talk and thought, such as he had often heard before in different forms and on different themes. But why had he happened to hear such a discussion and such ideas at the very moment when his own brain was just conceiving the very same ideas? And why, just at the moment when he had brought away the embryo of his idea from the old woman, had he dropped at once upon a conversation about her? This coincidence always seemed strange to him. This trivial talk in a tavern had an immense influence on him in his later action, as though there had really been in it something preordained, some guiding hint. On returning from the Haymarket, he flung himself on the sofa and sat for a whole hour without stirring. Meanwhile, it got dark. He had no candle, and indeed, it did not occur to him to light up. He could never recollect whether he had been thinking about anything at that time. At last, he was conscious of his former fever, and shivering, and he realized with relief that he could lie down on the sofa. Soon, heavy, leaden sleep came over him, as it were crushing him. He slept an extraordinarily long time and without dreaming. Stasia, coming into his room at 10 o'clock the next morning, had difficulty in rousing him. She brought him in tea and bread. The tea was again the second brew and again in her own teapot. My goodness, how he sleeps, she cried indignantly. And he is always asleep. He got up with an effort. His head ached. He stood up, took a turn in his garret, and sank back on the sofa again. Going to sleep again, cried Nastasia. Are you ill, eh? He made no reply. Do you want some tea? Afterwards, he said with an effort, closing his eyes again and turning to the wall. Nastasia stood over him. Perhaps he really is ill, she said, turned and went out. She came in again at 2 o'clock with soup. He was lying as before. The tea stood untouched. Nastasia felt positively offended and began wrathfully rousing him. Why are you lying like a log? She shouted, looking at him with repulsion. He got up and sat down, but said nothing and stared at the floor. Are you ill or not? Asked Nastasia, and again received no answer. You better go out and get a breath of air, she said after a pause. Will you eat it or not? Afterwards, he said weakly. You can go. And he motioned her out. She remained a little longer, looking at him with compassion, and went out. A few minutes afterwards, he raised his eyes and looked for a long while at the tea and the soup. Then he took the bread, took up a spoon, and began to eat. He ate a little, 3 or 4 spoonfuls without appetite, as it were, mechanically. His head ached less. After his meal, he stretched himself on the sofa again, but now he could not sleep. He lay without stirring, with his face in his pillow. He was haunted by daydreams, and such strange daydreams. In one that kept recurring, he fancied that he was in Africa, in Egypt, in some sort of oasis. The caravan was resting. The camels were peacefully lying down. The palms stood all around in a complete circle. All the party were at dinner, but he was drinking water from a spring which flowed gurgling close by. And it was so cool, it was wonderful. Wonderful blue, cold water running among the party-colored stones and over the clean sand, which glistened here and there like gold. Suddenly, he heard a clock strike. He started, roused himself, raised his head, looked out of the window, and seeing how late it was, suddenly jumped up wide awake, as though someone had pulled him off the sofa. He crept on tiptoe to the door, steadily opened it, and began listening on the staircase. His heart beat terribly, but all was quiet on the stairs, as if everyone was asleep. It seemed to him strange and monstrous that he could have slept in such forgetfulness from the previous day, and had done nothing, had prepared nothing yet, and meanwhile perhaps it had struck 6. And his drowsiness and stupefaction were followed by an extraordinary, feverish, as it were, distracted haste. But the preparations to be made were few. He concentrated all his energies on thinking of everything and forgetting nothing, and his heart kept beating and thumping so that he could hardly breathe. First he had to make a noose and sew it into his overcoat. A work of a moment. He rummaged under his pillow and picked out amongst the linen stuffed away under it a worn-out, old, unwashed shirt. From its rags he tore a long strip, a couple of inches wide and about 16 inches long. He folded this strip in two, took off his wide, strong summer overcoat of some stout cotton material, his only outer garment, and began sewing the two ends of the rag on the inside, under the left armhole. His hands shook as he sewed, but he did it successfully so that nothing showed outside when he put the coat on again. The needle and the thread he had got ready long before, and they lay on his table in a piece of paper. As for the noose, it was a very ingenious device of his own. The noose was invented for the axe. It was impossible for him to carry the axe through the street in his hands, and if hidden under the coat, he would still have had to support it with his hand, which would have been noticeable. Now he had only to put the head of the axe in the noose, and it would hang quietly under his arm on the inside, putting his hand in the coat pocket. He could hold the end of the handle all the way so that it did not swing, and as the coat was very full, a regular sack in fact, it could not be seen from outside that he was holding something with the hand that was in the pocket. This noose too he had designed a fortnight before. When he had finished with this, he thrust his hand into a little opening between his sofa and the floor, fumbled in the left corner and drew out the pledge, which he had got ready long before and hidden there. This pledge was, however, only a smoothly planned piece of wood, the size and thickness of a silver cigarette case. He picked up this piece of wood in one of his wanderings in a courtyard, where there was some sort of a workshop. Afterwards he had added to the wood a thin smooth piece of iron, which he had also picked up at the same time in the street. Putting the iron, which was little the smaller, on the piece of wood, he fastened them very firmly, crossing and recrossing the thread around them. Then wrapped them carefully and daintily in clean white paper and tied up the parcel so that it would be very difficult to untie it. This was in order to divert the attention of the old woman for a time, while she was trying to undo the knot, and so to gain a moment. The iron strip was added to give weight, so that the woman might not guess the first minute that the thing was made of wood. All this had been stored by him beforehand under the sofa. He had only just got the pledge out when he heard someone suddenly about in the yard. It struck 6 long ago. Long ago, my God! He rushed to the door, listened, caught up his hat and began to descend his 13 steps cautiously, noiselessly, like a cat. He had still the most important thing to do, to steal the axe from the kitchen. That the deed must be done with an axe, he had decided long ago. He had also a pocket pruning knife, and he could not rely on the knife and still less on his own strength, and so resolved finally on the axe. We may note in passing one peculiarity in regard to all the final resolutions taken by him in the matter. They had one strange characteristic. The more final they were, the more hideous and the more absurd they at once became in his eyes. In spite of all the agonizing inward struggle, he never for a single instant all that time could believe in the carrying out of his plans. And indeed, if it had ever happened that everything to the least point could have been considered and finally settled, and no uncertainty of any kind had remained, he would, it seems, have renounced it all as something absurd, monstrous and impossible. But a whole mass of unsettled points and uncertainties remained. As for getting the axe, That trifling business caused him no anxiety, for nothing could be easier. Nastasia was continually out of the house, especially in the evenings. She would run in to the neighbors or to a shop, and always left the door ajar. It was the one thing the landlady was always scolding her about, and so, when the time came, he would only have to go quietly into the kitchen and to take the axe, and an hour later, when everything was over, go in and put it back again. But these were doubtful points. Supposing he returned an hour later to put it back and Nastasia had come back and was on the spot. He would, of course, have to go by and wait till she went out again. But supposing she were in the meantime to miss the axe, look for it, make an outcry, that would mean suspicion, or at least grounds for suspicion.